So usually I do the hyperlapse videos for my baking videos, but I figured there's only so much you can glean from hyperlapse videos, and although I don't really like to be in my own videos, I figured it was time. So tonight I'm going to be showing you how I make a ganache cake. So I've already baked my cake, and I'll show you how I make it ahead of time and put it in the freezer. And then I'm going to show you how I ganache my cake and what boards I use, and how to get straight sides in the ganache. So I really only like to use ganache. I will use Swiss meringue buttercream inside my cakes, but as far as the outside, because I really like a firm and really crisp edges, I only use ganache, whether it be white chocolate or dark chocolate ganache. That's all I ever use. Under fondant. Now, if I'm not going to use fondant and I'm just doing a buttercream cake, that's different. But if I'm going to put fondant on, I always use ganache. All right, so the other thing I always use is my Cake Safe acrylic discs. So that makes it very easy for me to get straight sides on my cakes. And I'm going to show you my setup. So tonight what I'm doing is an 8-inch cake, and because I want to have room on the sides of my cake to put some ganache frosting, I am actually going to use two 8 by 8.25 acrylic discs. So these specific measurements I got from Cake Safe. So if you just go to the store, or if you go online on Amazon and try to buy acrylic cake discs, you're only going to get like 8 inches, 10 inches, 9 inches, whatever. But Cake Safe, this is why I love them, they will make 8.25 or 8.5, whatever you need, to give you a little bit extra room on the outside of that 8-inch cake for your ganache. So there's a reason why I've got two of them, because I'm going to put one on the bottom of the cake and one on the top of the cake, and that's going to give me really straight sides on my cake. So that's two things that I start with. Okay, now if I'm just making a cake for my family, which is what I'm usually doing, then this is all we'll use. But since I'm giving this cake to somebody else, I'm actually making this for our nanny's son for his birthday. I am going to use an 8-inch cake board, a cardboard cake board, on top of my 8.25-inch acrylic cake disc. And you're going to understand why in a little bit. So I need those things. Now, to set up, because if I just have this and I just put it directly on my cake, my cake turner, can't think of the name right now, then I'm gonna be scraping the ganache later, and I'm gonna begin scraping the ganache on my turntable. That's the word I was looking for, on my turntable. And then later I'm gonna have to pry it off this turntable to put it away. Having a setup board, which is going to be something that's a little bit larger than your cake, is going to make it much easier for me to be like, okay, well, I finished frosting my cake, so I'm just going to pick it up and put it away. So that makes it a lot easier, and so that's what I like to do. Of course, I've got the, I can't think of any words today, my shelf liner here between my cake disc and the turntable, and then I've got another one between my setup board and my 8.25-inch cake disc. Do I need all of this? I don't need any of this. I could do it without any of this setup. It just makes it a little bit easier. Takes a couple of extra seconds to set this all up, and my life will be a lot easier. In fact, I don't even really need this. This actually, extra piece might actually make it a little bit unstable here. So I'll actually use some ganache to put my bottom cake disc onto my setup board. Okay, so we can do that now actually. And my ganache has already firmed up a little bit because it's a little bit colder than usual in my kitchen today. So I'm gonna warm it up in a little bit here before I actually start putting it on my cake, because it'll be too firm to work with. Yeah, so that's just enough. And this can be easily removed later. I'll just stick a angled spatula underneath and remove it later, but this way I get a more stable surface. Okay. The one other thing I'm gonna need for doing this method is a piece of 8-inch parchment or 8.25-inch parchment. I just happen to have these pre-cut circles, so I'm gonna use that. All right, and so the next thing is I'm gonna warm up the ganache a little bit so it's a little bit more workable than this. This is a little bit too firm. If I use it this firm, it's just gonna move the cake and actually lift up crumbs while I'm working with it. So I'm gonna warm it up for like maybe 10 seconds in the microwave. And then we'll be back in ganache, and I'll show you how I ganache the cake. Okay, so I'm gonna show you next how I made the cake ahead of time, filled it, and froze it. And that way I cut out a lot of time from the day that I actually have to do the final frosting and putting on the fondant. So I can do this way ahead of time. It saves me a lot of time. What I did was I baked the cake, and I made two 8-inch cakes, and then I torted both of them, so I had 4 layers. And then what I did was I built the cake inside this 3-inch cake pan. I put a little parchment to go up to 4 inches because I wanted a 4-inch cake, and I put in 1 layer at a time with the ganache in the middle of each layer. And then that way, what that did is that gave me really nice straight edges on my cake, so I don't have to worry about aligning the cake layers. And also it gave me the ability to stick it in the freezer, get it nice and cool, and make it ahead of time. So then what I did last night is I pulled it out of the fridge, out of the freezer, and it thawed for 24 hours in the fridge. And then I took it out about 2 hours ago to like slowly come to room temperature, but it's still cool. It's not cold, so that's great. With ganache and cakes, I don't want it cold because the ganache will firm up really fast and it won't give me enough time to get the cake smooth, the cake side smooth. So I had it wrapped in saran wrap, and so I pulled off the saran wrap, and this is going to be super easy. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lift this. And I'm going to put a little bit of ganache on this. Okay, and then remember how I said I'm going to use this cake board? Well, this cake board is so that my friend can take the cake and I don't have to worry about getting one of my acrylic cake discs back. And this is going to be the easy way to smooth the sides with the acrylic cake discs, because it's a lot easier to smooth it against this acrylic cake disc rather than the cardboard. And then later I'll just put a little spatula here and take it off the cake disc. And then I'll put a little bit of ganache on my cake board. Okay. And that ganache is still kind of firm because I haven't warmed it up yet. And then I am going to line it up here. Good. And then I'm just going to flip the whole thing over. Take this off. And so since it's had a chance to thaw in the fridge, it's going to come right off the pan. Okay. And then I'll remove my parchment, and you can quickly see how nice it is to have those straight sides that are all aligned on my cake, and my ganache is already there as a filling. I just wanted to show you I lost a couple of crumb pieces off the cake, but that's no big deal because we're going to fill it up with ganache later. So I'm just checking, make sure my cake is cool but not cold. I don't want it cold. And then we're going to take off this final piece of parchment And again, don't worry if you removed a little piece of the cake with it, no big deal. And you'll see that this method not only saves time to get really nice straight sides, but it also saves time because I'm not going to even have to do a crumb coat. And you'll see that in a minute. I'm going to warm up the ganache now finely. Actually, one more thing before I let you go for this piece. I want to make sure that the cake is aligned on the acrylic cake disc. And what I mean by that is I want to make sure that I have enough room on both sides, not just enough room, but not too much room, so that there's enough room for ganache on both sides without one side having too much ganache and the other side having too little. So I'm just going to adjust this bottom board a little bit until I'm happy that both sides have about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch air space where I can fill it with ganache. So I'll just do that a couple of times until I'm happy, because in a minute that ganache on the bottom board is going to firm up and it's going to basically stay where I've got it. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Okay, so now I'm going to go warm up my ganache so I can use it. Okay, so now the ganache is softened up a little bit. I put it for 50% power in the microwave for about 15 seconds. I don't want to go too far. I'd rather it be a little stiff than too melted, because then can't really go back. We'll just have to wait until it firms up again. So I'd rather go easy on the microwave. Ganache is messy, okay? So we're just gonna we have to do our best, get over that fact that ganache is messy. Okay, so next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my parchment paper, and I am going to put a little bit, here, let me put this here for a second. I'm gonna put a little bit of ganache on just the sides of my second acrylic cake disc, and that's where the parchment paper is going to go, because we're going to remove it later. We don't want too much on here to make it very hard to remove, but we're going to make sure it's nice and smooth. And then we're going to start ganaching the top of our cake. So we're going to put some on there and start smoothing. And we're going to want to get a fairly smooth top before we add on our second disc. To see if it's pretty level, and it is. This is when I'm going to put the top of my top board on here, and then I'm going to level it from the sides, and I'm going to make sure it's level from the top. So first I'm going to do is make sure it's level from the sides, and I do that by taking 2 cake scrapers and I make sure they align. So right now it's not aligned, so I'm going to push a little bit from the right. Okay, I'm going to go around a couple of times doing that. So that looks good, and the next thing I'm going to do is make sure it's level on top, because we do not want a lopsided cake. We cannot fix a lopsided cake once we've got this crumb coat on it. So take your time, get it right from the beginning. Good, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to just soften up this ganache a little. Well, it's not bad actually. Okay, we're gonna work with it as is. I think it's pretty good, actually. All right, so we're gonna start. I'm gonna get all the crumbs out of my way. I don't want any crumbs in here. Okay, and so we're gonna start by applying the ganache, and we're gonna put a pretty decent amount. And you'll see why I love ganache, because it firms up beautifully, but it's also so smooth and easy to work with, in my opinion, although it is a little bit messy, but still. And so I'm going to put quite a bit on there because we're going to take it off later. And take away any crumbs I run into. We don't want crumbs. I would rather err on the side of putting too much rather than too little. If you put too little, you're going to end up pulling off some of that cake when you try to scrape the sides. So it's better to just overdo it, and then we'll take it away as we go, as we start scraping the sides. Okay, so we've got the sides covered. Now it's time for us to take away by scraping the sides. And now that we've got the acrylic disc on the top and the acrylic disc on the bottom, it's going to be super easy to do that scraping. Now we're not going to go all the way against the two boards in the beginning. We're just going to do a shallow scrape in the beginning. And unfortunately, I picked a setup board with a little crack, so that's making my scraper skip a little bit, but we'll deal with it for now. I should have seen that before. We might just have to throw away that cake board. Okay. So I'm starting to take away the excess now. And we're going to go a little bit deeper now with our scrape, and you see already how beautifully smooth this ganache is. And so we're going to go deeper and deeper with our scrape until, you know, we start to hit the bottom and the top cake boards, and then that's when we're really going to get a beautiful straight side. Okay, and you can see also that since I picked cake boards that were slightly larger than my cake, I've got plenty of room to coat the ganache, to coat the cake with the ganache without scraping the cake. So I'm going to keep going here. And by the time we take off all this excess ganache, we should be hitting the bottom and top cake boards with our scraping tool. And we're pretty much there. So we're gonna do a couple extra scrapes and we're gonna be done. And look at how smooth that ganache is. I will say that the temperature of the ganache is important. Although this is a little on the stiff side, a softer ganache is much more difficult to work with. So I'd rather just work fast with a ganache that's too stiff rather than take the chance of melting it too far and having a ganache that's too soft. And I'm not going at a 90-degree angle when I'm scraping. I'm going at more of a 45-degree angle. And you can see already that other than just a few little areas that need to be smoothed out, we're almost done frosting this cake. So I think I'm going to take one more turn, and then really to get it like perfect, and I could fiddle with this all day really, but I don't ever want to spend hours and hours fiddling on this part because there's more to the cake than this. But to really get it like beautiful, I will run this metal scraper through hot water and give it one scrape with the hot water and it'll be perfect. So I think we're gonna give it maybe one more scrape, one more turn, and that crack on that bottom setup board is driving me crazy, but that's okay, we'll just deal with it. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Maybe one more turn to get that excess off. Good. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Perfect. I am going to just try to get a little bit, so one last scrape where I start from the front here and go all the way around to get rid of the seams. So I'm at that point where I'm 99.9% happy. So I am going to leave it alone. And I don't even need a hot knife because honestly that ganache was like at a pretty good texture, firmness. So I don't even need to smooth it down anymore. It looks great. So now you're wondering what are we gonna do with the top? Okay. So what we're gonna do with the top is this. We're going to put the cake and see how I can easily lift it up now that I have this setup board. We're gonna put the whole cake in the fridge for about 10 to 15 minutes. I'll know when I can press on it and it's like firm. And at that point, we'll take it out of the fridge and take off the top board and you'll see how smooth it is. It very rarely needs a little touch up and that's it, and we're done. No crumb coat, just did the whole thing in one shot, okay? All right, so I'll be back once this has chilled a little bit in the fridge. Okay, so we're back. I got this out of the fridge. I didn't even need 10 minutes in the fridge, and look at that. That thing is like a wall. This is why I love ganache. Look at that. Firm. All right, so how are we gonna take this off? First, we're gonna scrape off this extra ganache on top. You can still save that for later. You don't need to throw that beautiful, lovely ganache away. All right, so then what I'm gonna do is I am going to dip my angled spatula in this cup of hot water in my lovely Wonder Woman mug. And I'm gonna dip it in here, give it a couple of seconds to warm up. And then we're gonna slowly go around the edges where we have that ganache on the parchment paper. And we're just slowly going to get in there and find our little entrance here between the parchment paper and the cake disc. And we're gonna start to slide that off. All right, and then I'm gonna warm up. So you're just kind of melting that ganache, and it should come off pretty easily now. There we go. And then you'll see the beauty of this technique. What I love is you're just going to very gently peel off that parchment. And voila, beautiful, smooth top. Needs just a little bit of finessing, not too much. First I'm gonna what I need is just a little bit of some soft ganache to fill in a couple of gaps that I got. And honestly, if you're covering this with fondant and you've got something on the top, you don't even have to waste your time doing this if it's going to be covered anyway. But in my case, I do need a smooth top. So I'm going to just go like this. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I filled in my little gaps. And I'm going to take my scraper again, and I'm going to try to get it level and go around. Okay. And I'm going to check to make sure it's level. We're almost there. Again, I can potentially get very fiddly with this, so I try to stop myself from doing this for, I could do this for hours till I'm happy, but I try to stop myself before I keep going for too long. At some point, you just have to say, that's good enough. So I'll take my metal ruler and I'll start just off the cake. That's how you get really fiddly. With smoothing the tops. But you can see I'm just like being super picky at this point. I mean, this looks near perfect already. And there's no need to spend precious hours trying to smooth out something that is pretty much almost perfect, right? Your time is better used elsewhere. Good. Now, you see those few little crumbs, those few little blobs on the top? I'm not worried about that, because what's going to happen is I'm going to let this cake set up overnight. I am not going to put fondant on it till tomorrow. That is like my absolute rule. I have tried to cheat the rule a little bit and like maybe give it an hour in the fridge to really firm up. It almost inevitably fails me if I try to do that. I think it needs to be set up at least 8 hours at room temperature. You don't need to cover it. Tomorrow I'll put fondant on it. But once it sets up, these little blobs, they'll be firm enough where I could just go boop, boop, and take them off. And I'm not worried about that right now, because if it's already firming up now, but it's not quite firm, so if I try to get it off, I'm just gonna mess up the finish on the cake. So I'm gonna leave it alone now. Remember my rule about just deciding to walk away. So right now I'm walking away, but you can see how beautiful a finish I got on that cake. Okay, so tomorrow I will potentially film putting the fondant on the cake and finishing it off. All right, thanks so much. Good night.